Does it say recording started? No. Hopefully should come. Yep. Okay, here it is. Cool. So thank you everyone for joining. I'll share my screen for a quick intro first, and then we'll get Shabnam to share her screen. So thank you for joining this call. This is Auckland Power BI user group, but virtual, so everyone is actually from their own desk at home or at work. And we have some of you joining outside of Auckland, which is amazing. Today's speaker is Shabnam. She is going to talk about incremental refresh and hybrid tables in Power BI. I just wanted to show you our meetup page, just in case you are not. Sorry, didn't mean to go to the messages. Just in case you are not joined to our meetup group, it's called Auckland Power BI and Analytics meetup group. So please go and join the group, all for free. We would have usually monthly meetings like this. Now we will go back to physical in-person meetings probably from September onward, but we will keep the hybrid elements of it. So for those of you outside of Auckland, you should be able to still join. So that's our user group. There are a few events and conferences coming up. Just wanted to give you a heads up on that. If you are in the United States, we have Chicago event coming in September. It's a 3-day conference, so make sure go and check it out. The website datainsightsummit.us is the website. If you are in New Zealand, we have Definity conference coming in November, late November. It's a 3-day conference as well. This is the 5th year we are running this event, so it's going to be great. And everywhere else you are in the world, we have the Power BI Summit 2023, which is in March. The date's already announced, so go and check it out. This is the 3rd year we are going to run it, and Shabnam was actually one of our speakers in the past 2 years as well as many other great speakers. In terms of the presentation today, make sure to turn off your microphone while the presentation is going. Shabnam will let us know if she wants to take questions anytime. Otherwise, keep your microphone mute unless you have a question. Better is if you raise your hand and then ask that, or put it in the chat window, and then we'll ask that from Shabnam at the time that she wants to take those questions. So that's pretty much me, organizers of these groups, me, Leila, Indira, and David. If you have any questions in the chat, feel free to reach out to us. So, yep, that's it. Shabnam, if you can please share your screen, that would be great.
Okay, one moment. Okay, do you see my screen?
Yep, seeing slides, yep.
Okay, just one moment. Let me get my Teams back up and then we'll get started. There we go. Okay, well, hello everyone. Thank you for joining the Auckland Power BI user group. I'm so excited to be here. This is my first time presenting for this user group. Hopefully one day in person I can present for this wonderful user group. Today we're going to talk about incremental refresh and hybrid tables in Power BI. A little bit about myself. I am a BI consultant. I have been working on data warehouse and business intelligence projects for 20+ years. During this time, my focus has been on analysis services and Power BI, and most recently, Synapse Analytics. I'm active on Twitter and LinkedIn and would love to connect with you. Find me on any one of those platforms. I also blog, and the link to my blog is here on this slide. I have 2 posts about incremental refresh, some of the stuff that I'm going to show you today. So first of all, the hybrid tables are available only in Power BI Premium or Premium per user capacities. The incremental refresh is available if you have only Pro and you're working with a shared workspace. But the hybrid option, which is the last part of it that you can enable, it's only for Power BI Premium or Premium per user. I am using a Premium per user to show you the demos. And then at the very high level, because this is can be confusing to some people, a hybrid table combines two different storage modes, the import and direct query, to give you the best of both worlds. The import will give you super fast performance. The direct query will give you access to most recent data in near real time. So it's giving you the best of both worlds between import and direct query. So that's super high level. We're going to go into details in a few moments. I'm going to go through some slides and we're going to talk about the storage modes. If you don't understand them well, hopefully by the end you'll get a better understanding. And then we're going to talk about incremental refresh and then hybrid table. So that's the flow of the session. So Power BI Desktop, when you work with Power BI Desktop, it's both a reporting tool where you can create your visualizations, and it's also a modeling tool. Most of the trainings that you go to, they start with modeling. So they show you how to bring data in. However, a lot of times it's actually good practice for you to use a pre-existing model that someone else in your organization has published. So the reason I mention this here is because the incremental refresh and hybrid tables is something you enable when you're modeling, not when you're connecting to someone else's model. So for example, if you're live connecting, that's not modeling. And by the way, live connect is not the same as direct query. Direct query is a table storage mode. Live connect, it means you're connecting to consume someone else's model, okay? So opposite of that is when you start by getting data. You go to get data, and then you decide how you want to bring in that data in, whether you want to leave it in the backend or you want to import it, and you define the relationships and measures and calculations. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Okay, that's when you can enable incremental refresh and the hybrid option. So Power BI has different table storage modes that you can define now these days per table. It used to be it was all in one or the other. So import, direct query, and then you have what's called mixed mode. It used to be composite models, but now it's called mixed mode. It means that you can choose per table, okay? So it can be import, direct query, and dual. We're going to look at all of these in detail in just a few moments. And then you have the hybrid. So hybrid is on top of everything else. Hybrid is one table that has two parts. So it's different than the mixed mode, okay? So let's take a look at import versus direct query first. With import mode, when you go to get data, you tell Power BI to import the data from your backend into Power BI's memory, whether it's in Power BI Desktop or later on in Power BI Service. For example, here I'm showing you some tables from the sample AdventureWorks database that hopefully some of you have seen before. We're looking at the sales data and by some dimensions, so a very simple model. And you can import all of this in Power BI's memory. That way, from that point on, visuals or user queries will only hit Power BI. They will never go to the back end, for example, to your Azure SQL database or SQL Server database. The benefit of this is that Power BI uses this in-memory engine called Vertipack that compresses data column by column, and it's super fast because everything's in memory and everything is compressed column by column, so it can answer analytical queries super fast. So like, give me the distinct list of product categories. It doesn't have to scan all the rows. It can just give you the distinct. So import is a great storage mode. It's the preferred mode for most of the models, right? Opposite of this is direct query. This one, in Power BI, you only define the schema and the relationships and measures and calculations. So this time Power BI does not contain actual data, but it knows how to form, for example, SQL queries to submit to the backend. So this time SQL Server is answering all the queries. So the benefit of this is that anytime your backend changes, your users will get the result right away. So that's a plus. However, now you're relying on SQL Server to answer the queries, and for some larger queries, that can be slow. So what do you do? When is the time to choose import versus direct query? So import is best for most models if your data can fit into memory. And if you don't have near real-time requirements, import is the right way to go. But if you have near real-time or if your data doesn't fit into memory, then you want direct query. Now, mind you, it takes a lot of data for your data not to fit into Power BI's memory. So after you followed all best practices and everything, let's say you still have a limit, then direct query is an option. With import, remember, because you have to refresh the data, you're actually moving data. So that takes time, right? And that time where it takes, even if your data fits into memory, for some people, they can't fit into a processing window, which with premium is 5 hours, they still cannot fit. So then they have to revert to direct query or use the incremental refresh, as we're going to see. So how do you choose between the two? The good news is you don't have to choose for your entire model anymore. You can choose per table, and this way your model is going to be called a mixed mode. Now, originally this used to be composite model, but it's not that anymore. Composite model is when you are live connecting these days to 2 different Power BI models, and now you can combine them together and model. This is not that, so mixed mode, okay? So in mixed mode, you're choosing your table storage mode per table. So looking back at the same example as before, you can say, for example, that the internet sales, it's too big. I don't want to bring it into Power BI's memory, or it takes a long time to process. I don't want to do that. I'm going to leave it in the backend. And perhaps sales territory changes frequently throughout the day. I don't want my users to wait for the next refresh window to see the changes. So I'm going to leave that also in direct query. But the product tables and the date table, I can put them into import because they don't change between refresh windows. And the benefit of that is that if someone clicks on a dropdown, if you have a filter in Power BI, at least that one will return super fast. But for sales and territory, it's okay to wait a few seconds, right? So this is great. So depending on the queries that are submitted to Power BI, to the model, Power BI knows where to go, either in memory or in the backend. This is good. This is a good setup. The only thing you have to remember is that if you submit a query that's by, so internet sales by sales territory can be completely answered by the backend, for example, SQL Server, and that's perfect. SQL Server will figure out the results, send them back to Power BI. But if you ask for, give me the internet sales for the product category of bikes, okay, with this current setup, there's a problem because what will happen is that SQL Server will try to parse all of internet sale and send it to Power BI, and then that filter, that where clause with this current setup on the screen will happen in Power BI's memory. And that's bad because remember, in this pretend scenario, the reason we didn't bring internet sales in the first place was that it didn't fit or it took so long, right? So we don't want to do that. The answer to that is that we can use something called dual. So this is the dual storage mode for the tables that are connecting to our table with direct query storage mode. We will set their storage mode to dual. What this means is that Power BI knows that it can use 2 copies of the table. One table is in memory. So if you tell it to give me a list of distinct products, it will use the copy that's in memory and it's super fast. But if you tell it to give you the sales for the bike category, it knows that it is allowed to use the copy of the product table in the back end. That join happening in a SQL Server is going to be super fast. You want to return the limited data instead of get all the data and then filter. So this is dual. So far we looked at import, direct query, and dual, okay? So now let's talk about data refresh. When you import a table into Power BI, into not Power BI desktop, but when you send it to Power BI service, you have to refresh your data so that your data is not stale anymore, okay? Now, as soon as we say refresh, by default, we're talking about import because direct query does not have any refresh, right? Nothing's moving. So import means, refresh means import. So let's say you have the fact internet sales and you haven't done anything as far as partitioning, incremental refresh, or anything like that. When you submit a refresh from Power BI service, it will submit a query and it will load all of that into one partition, one single partition. So if you look behind the scenes, you're going to see that it creates one partition for all of internet sales. Now, what is incremental refresh? With incremental refresh, what you can do, you can say, okay, I know that my data, all of my data doesn't change all the time. So once I've loaded a one-time copy of it, there's no need for me to reload the data for the past 10 years. So for example, I know that the data for 2018 to 2021 does not change anymore. My sales records are sealed. So from after my first load, after my first import, I don't want to load them again. I only want to load the data for the first 3 months of the year. So in this pretend example, we are in March. Okay, so January, February, March. Those are the only 3 that I want to reload. You can do this by defining an incremental refresh policy from Power BI desktop for this internet sales. Now, what happens is that with the initial load, everything gets loaded, but everything gets loaded in these parts. So it's no longer a ginormous select everything. It submits one query per partition based on your definitions. Now, this is good because if your backend can handle parallel queries in parallel, more than one query, which typically is the case if your backend, for example, is SQL Server, then even your one-time load is going to be faster, especially if your backend is partitioned in a similar way, or at least if you have indexes in place, you have your statistics up to date, so it can hit just the right data. So this is the first load. It loads everything. But then from that point on, from the next refresh that you submit from Power BI service, whether it's manual or it's a scheduled refresh, it is only going to update the last 3 months that you have defined. So this is incremental refresh. The benefit is that it will go, even your initial load can go faster. The next loads obviously will go faster because you're only loading the most recent data. Because your refreshers go faster, by definition, they're going to be more reliable. Because the longer your refresh takes, I'm sure you've seen it, there's more of a chance that something goes wrong in your network or your connections and the refresh is killed. It will also put less pressure on your backend resources, your network and everything. So some things to consider is that you have to make sure, though, to get the best possible performance, that the partition filters are pushed back to your data source. You have to make sure query folding is happening. Actually, Power BI Desktop warns you about this one. And then one of the things that you have to remember is that whether you're doing incremental refresh or not, you lose query folding as soon as when you go to get data, instead of selecting an entire object, if you write a custom query, you're going to lose the ability for Power BI to fold the where clause into your query. So instead of doing select star from your view, do select the whole view. Excuse me. And then make sure they're covered by indexes and statistics. If this is an area you're not familiar with, you can get help from your DBA. This is a part where you want to be super friendly with your DBA. All right. So the incremental refresh it's something you define using Power BI Desktop. You right-click on your table, and then you will tell it that what you want to be the archive data, which is the data that's pulled only once, and then the window where you want the data to be refreshed. Now, on top of that, so far, everything that we talked about so far, you can do with the Pro. So now the the most recent addition is the hybrid table. This part you need to have a premium capacity or premium per user capacity to work with. With the hybrid table, so a hybrid table is one table that has two partitions. It had at least two. It has two sections, okay? One section is an import, one section is in DirectQuery. This is not dual. Dual was all in DirectQuery or all in import, and Power BI knew which one to go after. This one is one table, one part is in import, one part is in DirectQuery. The typical use case is old data in import because old data doesn't change, but you want to get super fast performance. Newer data in DirectQuery to get near real-time benefits, but you can wait a little bit for the newer data. So looking back at our example, the internet sales, we can say that data before March, so up until March, the data from 2018 to 2021, January and February, for example, they can be in import. When a refresh comes in, January and February will get, with the subsequent refreshes, they will get refreshed. But then the March data is just going to be in the backend. Okay, so looking at the same example, now with the refreshes, whether manual or automatic, you are going to get only this top one should not be there. So January and February are going to be imported, and this last one is just DirectQuery. Okay, and the way you do that is that from the exact same interface that you enable incremental refresh, you can check that. There's another step where you can check that and you can tell it to get the most recent data in DirectQuery, and that time period for it is the exact same time period that you pick in the incremental refresh. So in this case, it's going to pick the last month. Okay, so going back now to the storage table storage modes, okay, looking back at our setup. So now we have internet sales that has two parts. It has import and DirectQuery. Now it is best practice to set every other table that connects to this table to dual because it has a DirectQuery section built into it. So hopefully this part is clear. So dual is your friend, especially when you're working with hybrid tables. So make sure you set that up. Okay, so it's time for demo. I'm going to pause here to see if there are any questions while I bring up the demo.
So far looks fine.
Okay.
No questions.
All right.
Oh, yep, got a question just right now. Does hybrid tables works with SQL data source only or can be used with data flow?
I am not myself. I'm not a data flow expert. So unfortunately, I don't know the answer. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I have to look up my my post about this one. I think that the partitioning part, so incremental refresh you can do, but the hybrid option, I'm not sure you can do that part. Okay.
One more question is that, do I have full DAX with hybrid tables?
So with hybrid tables, you have some limitations. So the answer is no, you don't, because it has a section that has the DirectQuery, you have some limitations. So whatever limitations you have with DirectQuery are going to apply here. I have a slide at the end that I have a couple of limitations that I will show you when we get there.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. All right. So let's take a look at my data source. So I'm working with the AdventureWorks sample database. I have it in my Azure SQL DB. I have created a view called Fact Internet Sales Big. I have just generated some extra data for this purpose. So the numbers look a little bit different than the typical adventure works that you see. I'm going to run this query so that we can see what's in the table. So I have data here. I actually have data from 2010 here, but from 2014 to 2022, you can see my sales data. And if I go to Power BI, this is my model. So I have the facts, internet sales, and I have the dim date here. So I can create my a couple of visuals with it. Now, this one, if you hover over, you see that with the visuals actually showing us that this is dual. So this arrow here tells you that it's actually, so it was DirectQuery first, so it's going to backend, and then I swapped it to dual. And if you don't remember, the storage modes are under advanced, and you can see the storage modes from here. So this one I've set to dual. Once you set something to import, though, you cannot switch it back. So see, this one I cannot switch back. So if you are planning to start with working with incremental refresh, make sure that you start your dimensions with DirectQuery. You cannot revert back. So you just have to remove them and add them back in if you already built a model, okay? So this is import, and this is dual. And we have one simple relationship. And right now, there's nothing is set up. There's no incremental refresh or anything. And in fact, if I go here right now, I cannot do it. It's telling me that I need to set up parameters. Okay, so the first step is to set up parameters. And let's go ahead and do that. Let's take a quick look at the report also. So I have a by year visual, and then July and August. And you can see that we go to August 24th right now, okay? All right, now let me go back to the, go back here under transform data. So in order to set up parameters, I'm gonna go to transform data and then manage parameters. And we need to create two parameters. One is called range start. We said I'm going to set the data type to date time. This type that you pick, it must match the data type of your column in the table. So we're going to use this to filter our table, to partition by it, right? So this, whatever you pick, it must match. Okay, so I'm going to choose 1/1/2018 for this one, and then click on new, and I'm going to create a new one. Range end. Type is going to be date time, and this one I'm going to choose 1/1/23. Now, if you're just using parameters to limit the data you're working with, it doesn't matter whether this outer bound is inclusive or not. You notice that I've pushed this one day into the future because I'm going to exclude this one. I'm going to say my date is before this one. So this becomes important when you go to generate the partitions. Otherwise, you are going to have overlap for that one day. Okay, so I have 2018 and I have 2023. So there's a question about why date time, not date. That's because my data type for this particular example is date time. So it must match whatever you have, okay? All right, so now I have two parameters, right? And now that I have these parameters, I can go to order, where are you? Order date here. And I'm going to go to date time filters, custom filter, okay? I'm going to filter my table with that, with the two parameters that I created, okay? So I'm going to say where date is after or equal to, and from here I'm going to choose parameter. It already defaults the first parameter, so range start, and we want it to be before parameter range end. Okay, you can call these whatever you want if you're just doing this to filter, but if you plan to use this for incremental refresh, Power BI is going to look for these reserved words. So make sure you choose these exact words, okay? Now, as soon as I click OK, this is going to filter this data. So for example, this 2014 row is going to disappear, okay? So I'm going to click OK. So now the data before 2018 is gone, and I'm going to go close and apply. All right. So far we have just implemented parameters, all right? And this by itself is a good practice if you're working with your modeling. You don't need to work with all of the data to create your model. Okay, so now that I have this one, I'm gonna save this. Let me quickly save this as demo 1. And then we're going to publish this and take a quick look at this one. So far, we don't have partitions or anything. We just have parameters. But I want to show you what this looks like in Power BI service. So we're going to publish this to my workspace there. And while it's publishing, let's go here and take a look at the workspace. And it's going to show up here in just a second. Still working on it. Any minute, Power BI. Here we go. Let's see. That's my previous one. All right, well, while this is working on publishing, let me go back here. I will go into my other workspace that I've published this before, thankfully. Okay, so this is the same file that I've published before. So while it's working on that one, let me show you this one. So once this publishes, you can go to the settings and look at the parameters, okay? Now, if it opens up and it says, excuse me, I'm getting over a cold. So if it says parameters haven't been defined, what this means is that, okay, so two things. They either haven't been defined or they have been used for to define incremental refresh. That means you cannot change them from here anymore. One more property that I want you to take a look at is the server settings. So if you go to the server settings, you can get this connection string, which you can use to connect to it from Power BI Desktop. Now, if you don't see this, that means you are not in a premium workspace or premium per user workspace. As you can see, I'm here on a PPU trial for this particular account to be able to demo you this stuff. So let's see. Okay, this finished. So now if I go back here to my, okay, all right. So this is here. Now let me go and look at the settings from here. Look at the parameters. You see that the parameters are available here. Now that I've published this, I can change this parameter from here. I can set this to, for example, 2010 to load all of my data. It'll be one partition, but it will load all of the data. This by itself is best practice if you're working with larger data sets, okay? Now let's get the server setting from here. So I'm going to copy this one and we're going to go to, we can use two different tools to look at the partitions that Power BI creates, either Management Studio or Tabular Editor, okay? So I'm going to use Management Studio for this one. I'm going to go to Connect, Analysis Services, and then I'm going to put the same connection string here, okay? And connect. And this will, let me actually disconnect this one. Okay, so this shows me the data set. All right. Now, if I open this one, I can get to the tables. And if I right click, I can see the partitions, right? It's not the best interface, but it's better than nothing, right? So I can see that there's only one partition. And if I script this one, I can look at the behind the scenes, and I can see that if we go to partition, I can see that there is one partition, and it tells me that it's import, and this is the Power Query code here, okay? And I can see that it says where order date bigger than range start and order date is less than range end. Again, this is critical. If you include both ends with incremental refresh, you're going to get into trouble. Okay, so far we only have one partition, right? So now let's go and change this. So back to our Power BI desktop. I'm going to go back to the model. Now that I have parameters, I can go to incremental refresh and I can enable this, okay? And this will tell you that the hybrid is only premium only. It gives you a lot of help here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, we want to incrementally refresh this table. That means go ahead and partition it for me. And we are going to say, okay, we want to only archive data for the last 5 years. Beyond 5 years, we don't care. We don't want to see it. And let's incrementally refresh data starting the, we can do the last, we can do the last month, okay? So I'm going to say the last month. And as soon as you do that, it actually gives you some idea what they are going to be. So from 2017 to 20 to July of 2022 is going to be the archive data. It's going to be imported, okay? And then from August 1st to August 31st, it's going to be incrementally refreshed. This is also going to be imported at this point. Nothing is direct query. Direct query option is down here. I'm not going to enable it yet, okay? So 5 years and 1 month, apply. And then there's also a visual down here that tells you how this works, okay? So I'm going to click on apply. And let's save this as, I'm going to save this as my second one so that we don't overwrite the other one. I want to keep that for comparison purposes, all right? Let's go ahead and publish this one. And while this is publishing, I will show you the tabular editor as well. So same way that I connected to the model from Management Studio, you can use tabular editor. I'm using the free version of tabular editor, the version 2. So you can go to File, Open, and I go to From Database, and I put the exact same connection string here. And click on OK, and this actually brings up everything that's in there. So the second one has shown up there. So let's go ahead and open the second one to take a look at it from here. So this is a wonderful tool. It does many different things. For now, we're just focusing on looking at the partitions with it. Okay, so we go to the tables, and this one, it actually has a folder for partitions. And if I click on it, I only see one. So wait a minute, what happened? I told this to partition my data, but I still have one. The reason is that the very first time when you publish, it still creates just one partition, okay? Until you submit a first refresh from Power BI service, those partitions are not actually created. Everything's in one. So this has to be part of your process. You publish from Power BI desktop, then you go to the service, or you may have an automated way of doing this. You must submit one refresh from the service for it to actually create all those partitions, okay? So I'm going to click on refresh. Now, this one, it is creating all those partitions and it is doing a full load. So it's pulling everything now. It goes super fast because I only have a little bit of data. So now let's go back here and I'm going to redo this one to get it to refresh. And this time, if I did everything right, if I go to the tables under partitions, I should see the partitions. So now you can see that it has created these partitions. We have 5 yearly partitions. And then we told it that we want to refresh the last month incrementally, but you notice that it created a Q1 and Q2 partition, and then one for July and one for August. The reason is that what it does is that it starts creating all these other partitions in the biggest possible chunk that it can, until it gets to the time period that you have defined. In our case, we said August, it was the last month. So it recognizes that it can bundle up the first 3 months into Q1, the second 3 months into Q2, then it has to create a 1 month to get to August. Because remember, if you have too many partitions also, you're going to hurt your refresh performance. If you want to have a balance for how many partitions you're creating. If you create hundreds of them, or if you start creating daily partitions for every second day, your actual refresh is going to be slower. So you can see that now if we take a look at the timestamps, you can see here, it actually shows us that, well, first of all, this is the start and the end. So I'm on the Q1, start and the end, what's the storage mode, and it should show me the partition, the actual timestamp, which is 1240. This is UTC, okay? So now if I go back here, everything should say 1240. Everything says 1240. If I go back here and I submit another refresh, this time, this is our second refresh from the service, it should only refresh that one partition, only this one. I'm going to go here and reopen this one to get it to refresh. There might be a better way of refreshing this, I just don't know. So this is the most reliable way that I have to get it to refresh. So I go to partitions. So notice we're looking here. It's 1240, 1240, 1240, 1240. This is 1242. So from this point on, anytime you do a refresh from the service, it's gonna only refresh the last month. So this is the beauty of the incremental refresh, right? Once you're past your first one, you can only refresh what's needed. Your refreshes are going to go faster. Your users are going to have data faster. Your backend DBAs are going to be happier with you. It's really great. Okay, so now let's go back to Power BI desktop and make a couple of changes. So I'm going to go back here, back to incremental refresh. I'm going to change this a little bit so we can run some queries and see data changing, okay? So I'm going to change this to the last 7 days. All right, so we still want the last 5 years. And by the way, the years, it creates whole years. It's not like the last, if you say the last month, it's not the last 30 days. It always finds whole chunks of calendar periods to do the partitioning. So we still want the last 5 years, but we only care about the last 7 days. And this time I'm actually going to also enable the direct query. So now what's happening is that data up until from 8/16 to 8/22 is going to be incrementally refreshed. These are our imports. And then from 8/23 onward, it's going to be direct query. By the way, this is actually an interesting time for me because calendar-wise, I'm on August 23rd. So Power BI Desktop thinks that I'm on 23rd, but the service actually for me, my refresh is working off of the UTC. So refresh actually loaded data for August 24th. Okay, so I'm going to apply this one. All right. And by the way, if I were to publish this over the current data set, it would destroy all the partitions that are already out there. So you have to be careful when you change a partitioning strategy. You need to have a process in place if you're changing things, because it will wipe out the existing partitions. And if you've loaded a lot of historical data, you have to be careful about that. Okay, so for now, I'm going to save this as I'm gonna save this one as this last one. So we have the last 7 days, and I have the incremental refresh with the hybrid option saved. Let's go ahead and publish this one. Okay, let's go and take a look at this report. So it's here. And right now, if I go, by the way, if I go look at the report itself, we have 2018. So it right now with the first publish, it has exactly what was loaded in Power BI desktop. Let me do a refresh here. Okay. And now I'm going to go back here, submit a refresh. This will do my first refresh. This will generate the actual partitions. And when this is done, I'm going to open them up so that we can take a look at those partitions. Okay, go back here, open. And I can keep using the same setting of the other data set. What this does is that it takes me to the actual workspace, so I can see every data set that's in that workspace. So I don't have to keep changing it, okay? Go back to the table, partitions. And I have the 5 years here, and now you can see that it has Q1, Q2, it has the month of July. And for August, because we have told it that we want to refresh the last 7 days, it has no choice but to break August now into days. So it starts going from days up until, you see, up until 23rd, everything is an import. Okay, so everything I click here is an import. And then it has this last partition here that starts from August 24th. And this one is now in DirectQuery. So anything that comes that from August 24th, this is going to be sent back to my Azure SQL database to be answered. Okay, so now let's take a look at the report one more time. Okay, and I'm gonna hit this. This one here is not a data set refresh. This just refreshes my visuals. It doesn't actually pull data. The only thing that this will cause to update is the data for the 24th that's in DirectQuery. It will submit a new SQL query to the backend. Everything else is already in Power BI's memory, and until I do some kind of refresh, it's not going to be updated. Okay, so I just want to make sure I have the latest, but sometimes this caches, so sometimes you have to do this refresh. I see a question in the chat. Will these many partitions slow down the refresh or any other impact? Yes. So having too many partitions does slow down refresh. So you have to be careful when you are designing partitions. Now, Power BI, as time goes by, will automatically merge the smaller partitions into the bigger ones to keep up with your partitioning strategy. So it's not like for the rest of time in this example, it's going to keep adding daily partitions. At some point, it will merge them back into a quarterly partition the moment it gets a chance, or a monthly partition, and then into a yearly. So it will do the partition management for you. But as a rule of thumb, you don't want to have too many partitions. So you have to pay attention to of course, the number of rows that you have, right? If you generate too many, then obviously you're hurting performance, right? Okay, great question. All right, so now let's go back to the SQL database and run a query, okay? So looking at, I'm going to update the data for 3 days, okay? We're going to update data for August 1st because August 1st is outside of our window, okay? So I'm going to run a query, just make sure that we're still at this 173,000, which matches what's up here. All right, so now I'm going to update this one and multiply it by 2.2. All right, so I'm going to update data for August 1st. This is outside of our incremental refresh window. I'm going to update data for August 22nd, for August 23rd. And since we have actually rolled, since I created this demo, we have rolled forward 1 day UTC-Y. So I'm going to update also the 24th. Okay, so we have updated 4 days. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the report. And now I am going to hit this refresh. The only cell that I expect to be updated is this one, because that's the only cell that's in DirectQuery. So let's see if this can actually update. And you see that this one updated. So this is the benefit of the hybrid. So if you set up automatic page refresh. So the use case for this is that for certain reports, you can set up automatic page refreshes. So as new data comes in, if the reason for DirectQuery is the near real-time scenario, then as data comes in, your most recent data will keep updating automatically, or as your users hit refresh. Now, I'm going to go back and just to show you the other part, go back to the data set and do a refresh. This time, we expect to see the data for the 22nd and 23rd to update in the report, but not August 1st, because August 1st is outside of our 7 days. Let me make sure that went way too fast. Okay, so this is still cached. So this is cached in Power BI service. So I'm gonna hit this one to actually refresh the report, and we should see these two refresh, but not this first one. Okay, so let's do a refresh, and you see that these two numbers changed, but this one did not. So this is incremental refresh for you in a nutshell, with the hybrid option that gives you that last part of it that can update automatically with a page refresh. Let me just show you one more thing from here before I go back to the slides. So one of the benefits for partitioning is that when not just for the near real time, in general, if you're creating these partitions, one of the things that can help you is with your initial load. If you have a large data set, right? So you can create your partitions, but you don't have to process them all anymore. You can choose certain partitions to process. What you can do is you can connect to your Power BI dataset from SQL Server Management Studio. You can find your table, and let me actually connect to, let's connect to the other one. Let me see. Let me actually get the connection string for this one, and then we'll come back to it. So from Management Studio, you have to have the individual connection string. Server settings, copy. Let's go back here, connect analysis services. Okay, and here, if I go look at the tables, I look at the partitions, this will show me the partitions, and this is nice from here, a different view than Tabular Editor. It gives you the row counts. This is nice by itself. Obviously, these are too small, too little rows to be here. And then one of the things you can do is if you script a table now, you can see the actual partition queries from here. If I go partitions, okay, I can see the actual partitions from here. What's the start? What's the end? And if you have if you have made a mistake and you have included both ends of the boundaries, you're going to see that these are going to overlap. And so that's one way you can QA. Okay. And then the other thing you can do back to the processing is that you can go and say process. You can do a process table from here. But what you can do is that you can not actually run it. So you can do a process full and then hit this script button up here. And this will generate the JSON that would process your database. Now, this process full is always going to honor the partitioning strategy. There are a couple of extra flags that you can pass to it. Let me see if I have one saved here to show you. So if you don't want to apply the partitioning strategy, you can use this apply refresh policy. You can drop that off. And the other thing you can do is that if you are testing for demos or for other testing purposes, you can actually force the day that it thinks is the actual day. So I can force this one to think it's August 1st, or I can force this one to think that it's January 1st. That way, if you're playing with the partitions and see how many it creates and how many chunks it creates, this effective date is the nice way to do it. Okay. All right, so that's the end of my demo. So let me go back to the slides real quick. All right, so to summarize, you can set up incremental refresh on a table. They can enable with or without the hybrid option. Just the interface makes it super easy for you to enable hybrid from the Power BI desktop. And then as a reminder, everything connecting to it should be set to dual for you to get the best possible performance. There are some limitations that may change in future, but currently, if you set up hybrid tables, the distinct counts or min-max over string columns may not perform well. Analyze in Excel may not perform well. This is the approximate distinct count is not supported. I think the reason for this is because now you have like two chunks going on and one part is in DirectQuery. So this cannot be efficiently done. The other limitation is that a hybrid table cannot be used as an aggregation table, and it itself cannot have aggregations. Now, a limitation of the aggregations, which are summaries, is that the base table that you define aggregations for, it has to be in DirectQuery. And then your aggregations are import. If you try to enable aggregations on an import table, currently it is not supported. As a result, hybrid tables fall in the same category because they're half import, half DirectQuery. And hybrid tables cannot have calculated columns. Again, these are the current limitations. Some of them may change over time. To summarize, again, only the hybrid is only in Power BI Premium or PPU. The incremental refresh is available in the Pro. The only downside with the Pro is that it will actually create the partitions for you, but you can't see it. So that's kind of the downside. So you have to trust it, but you can tell because your refreshes will actually go faster. And then the scenario that I showed you is super easy to set up with Power BI Desktop, where historical data is in import, newest data is in DirectQuery. However, there's also an opposite case of this. There's another use case that you cannot do from the interface, but you can do if you use your own custom XML or TMSL code or use Tabular Editor, where old data in this scenario, you leave it in DirectQuery because in this particular scenario, let's say your business people don't care about the old data, only occasionally they go look at it so you don't need to bring it into Power BI's memory. They only care about the newest data. So in this case, your newest partition is going to be import, your old data is going to be DirectQuery. So this is the opposite of what we talked about. This one you have to manually set up. You cannot do it from Power BI. desktop. I have uploaded these slides to my GitHub. I'm going to put the link in the chat if you want to download them. There's all the references here that help you how to set up the incremental, refresh, and hybrid. And with that, that brings me to the end of this presentation. So Reza, back to you.
Awesome. Thank you. Amazing presentation.
Thank you.
We have a few questions to go through. I think one was from George asking why the latest partition, the one that is DirectQuery, is called Legacy DirectQuery.
I think you saw that from Tabular Editor. I don't know the reason for that. Let me
Yeah,
here,
probably
let me see.
It's like a specific object type naming.
Yes, I have seen that too. I don't know why.
The reason why I ask that is usually when I see the word legacy with anything that's related to Power BI, it means it's something that they're phasing out and bringing something back in, like, you know, the web connections and other things that they've done in that way.
So I don't know where this is reading this. You're absolutely right. Legacy usually hints that something's changing. I don't see the same thing from the management studio when I scripted out.
Oh, the other question from Elham is that imagine we have a transactional table with over 400 million rows. Do we need to import all the records first?
Okay, so 400 million rows, depending on your backend system, I would say you still can. You don't have to, you can. So bare minimum, I would use the parameters. Okay, use the parameters when you're working in Power BI desktop, limit it to only a year, a quarter, a month. And then in the service, lift the parameter to do a full import. Now with partitioning, what you can do, I didn't show you this, but you can bootstrap. So what you can do is you can, in Power BI desktop, you can add a where clause. If you're working with really, really big data and you don't want to pull everything at once, you can put a where clause to basically zero out all of your rows. And then you can use a tool like AML toolkit to lift it in Power BI service to only let the Power BI service pull the data. So that's one way of doing it. And then another way of doing it is that when you do your first publish, what you can do is you can use the tabular editor. Actually here you can right click and do apply refresh policy. This will create the partitions for you, but it will not actually process them. Then you can go in Management Studio and slowly, manually, you can partition them one at a time to get to your 400 million rows.
Thank you. So still a few more questions. Stacy saying that it looks great, but won't work in my case because I'm using Excel files and this wouldn't be supported. There any method you suggest for auto merge, auto update datasets sourced from Excel file, one file each month?
So I think you are correct because Excel, so this whole setup hinges on the DirectQuery, right? And if your data source does not support DirectQuery, then the hybrid option doesn't work, and then you have to have query folding, right, for the partitioning to work. I'm not sure what's the best way for Excel files. But
yeah,
you know, just a reminder, really the incremental refresh and the hybrid option is for when you're working with large data sets. So you get to a point where it's not feasible anymore to do a whole process from scratch. So if you're working with Excel files, I don't know how big your Excel files are, so hopefully you don't have that much data that you're working with.
Thank you. And yeah, I concur on that Excel file, you probably have maximum 1 million row in a file. So get data from a folder, either a SharePoint folder or a normal on-premises folder would be probably your best option, that even if a new file comes in, they would be automatically combined. Question from Sydney, and she got, I think, another question as well. Do you want to turn on your mic, Sydney, and ask the question?
Oh, yes.
Oh,
my first question.
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. A common mistake. If you have an incremental refresh schedule set up, can you, because sometimes historical records can be adjusted, is there a way to set up a less frequent schedule? So once a month, once a week, to do a full refresh without having to go in there manually do it?
I don't think you can do it from the Power BI service, from the scheduled refreshes. I don't think there is a way for one data set for you to define two different refresh policies. So you have to use maybe Power Automate or the REST APIs to create your other schedule.
Okay. My other question was in the incremental refresh setup. Yeah, we've had difficulty in the past. Sometimes fact records can actually go in the future. Can they handle future dates?
If you have the DirectQuery one, it can, because the DirectQuery one, the last partition is open-ended. You see how it says, for example, it says onward. Okay, you see how it says from and it's gone from August 24 to 2028. So this is one way to handle future data. Otherwise, they are closed.
Okay.
And then okay, so one more thing is that just like with analysis services, you can always create your own partition. You're not bound to this. You can create your own partition, but then you have to be careful next time you publish. You don't want to overwrite it. So the moment you get into partitioning, you have to separate your visuals, your reports from your model. You can no longer change your visuals and keep deploying, right? Because you're going to destroy your partitions. And so separate model and your reports first, and then you can do those more advanced scenarios manually. So Power BI does it does a lot of the basic scenarios for you, but when you get into more advanced stuff, you have to do it manually.
Just one more question. With the hybrid and the dual setups, did I understand correctly? They do, when you got them set up, they don't handle calculated columns. Like that is that's a limitation. Is that correct?
Yes, that is a limitation. Correct.
Okay, that's for both dual and hybrid methods. For the dual storage mode and the hybrid ingestion.
It's a limitation of the hybrid.
The hybrid.
It's a limitation of hybrid. Yes. Dual, I don't. That's a good question. That one I haven't actually paid attention to. So any limitation that applies to DirectQuery would apply to the hybrid. So that makes me think about the dual as well. I need to go check on that one.
Okay, no worries. Thank you very much. Great presentation.
Okay, no, you're welcome. Thank you.
Thanks.
Awesome, thank you. I think we covered all other questions. Is there anyone else having any questions?
No, I must admit I'm impressed with the presentation, the thoroughness, although forgive me, I'm going to have to rewatch it because you do tend to talk a little bit fast, and me being an older person, I can't catch up so fast.
Awesome.
Thank you for the feedback. Thank you.
Thanks, Shabnam. It was a great presentation. Thank you, everyone, for joining. We'll be in touch in the next meeting, and Shabnam will let you go to have a quieter evening now.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, everyone. It was great. Thank you for all your questions and attending, and enjoy the rest of your day or evening wherever you are.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.